So this week we deal with human sexual response, understanding arousal and orgasm, and I'll try to keep this one short this time. But I do want to give you a bit of an overview of what Dr. Lee Miller is going to be covering in this chapter. So he makes a comment very early on about the brain being the biggest sex organ, and so the comment actually alludes to the fact that there are areas and structures within the brain that are really keyed into sexual arousal. So we call the limbic system of our nervous system the pleasure center. Part of the limbic system is also the amygdala. So we've actually studied individuals who during sexual activity we are able to see scans of the activity in these areas, and the amygdala does lighten up big time. It lights up during heightened sexual activity. So some of you, if you've taken a general psychology course already, know that the amygdala is associated with the fight or flight response, with fear and so forth, and with excitement. But the more we study the amygdala, the more we find out that it's really our emotional landscape. Much of it is involved in terms of the amygdala. He also talks about erogenous zones and the G-spot. The G-spot, that magical spot on the body where that would trigger us to have the most powerful orgasm, could be a myth, and this is a big source of debate at this point in time. But we do have erogenous zones, and while we can generalize about what on the female anatomy versus the male anatomy would constitute erogenous zones, or those areas of the bodies which would respond with a heightened sense of pleasure, there are some that are standardized, and Dr. Lee Miller goes into that with you. We also examine our sense of vision and our sense of touch in terms of erogenous zones. Men tend to be more visually inclined than women are, and that might be partially the reason why men are more drawn to watching pornography than women are. The statistics seem to bear that out. And then we talk about the sense of smell. Our species probably has like one of the least developed senses of smell among many organisms on the planet. So it's not quite as robust as, say, the silkworm. I know a couple of you were in my general psychology class, and you may remember when we were talking about the chapter on sensation and perception that I mentioned the silkworm and how sexy those creatures were. In fact, the male silkworm can detect a female pheromone or sex chemical from just 1/1,000,000th of an ounce from over a mile away. However, our ability to sense, not necessarily consciously, odors and aromas that turn us on are not nearly as heightened as the silkworms. We've done some studies about this. We know that the armpit may be responsible, the glands of the armpit may be partially responsible for emitting some pheromones. One of the studies indicates, and I think Lee Miller mentions this one, that the scents from the armpits of gay men are found least attractive by heterosexual men and women, whereas gay men tend to find heterosexual men's armpit aromas least of a turn on. Also, during sexual activity, he examines this idea of vocalization. Who's noisier doing lovemaking? And women tend to be, and that's not just germane to human beings. That seems to be the case across species. And by now, I would imagine that most of you know that both males and females have both estrogen, the female hormone, and testosterone in their systems. So basically, testosterone has lesser amounts in a woman's system, right? But testosterone is that hormone that makes a woman more capable of having sexual arousal. And can you imagine if men only had testosterone, right? I mean, we found some negative correlations of overabundance of testosterone in male personalities, for example. They become more aggressive. They're more likely to act out in school, and to be behavioral problems for teachers and so forth. So basically, the estrogen tends to kind of tone that sort of thing down, probably gives men more of a capacity to bond with their erotic partners. And that brings us to oxytocin, which is the love or cuddle hormone. So this is actually, sex is the activity that during which oxytocin is generated next to the most. Okay, it's actually childbirth that produces more oxytocin. Because basically, the mother has been bearing this child for approximately 9 months, and childbirth rarely is a pleasurable thing, right? So nature has provided this biological response, this flood of oxytocin, this release of those hormones, so that the chance of bonding between the mother and the newborn is heightened. And then Masters and Johnson, I think probably these two sexologists have the most widely accepted theory of human sexual response. They say that it starts with excitement. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get into anyone unless you're excited during the activity, followed by plateau. Plateau makes it sound as though things are evening out, but here it's like during the plateau stage, excitement continues to build, but then it reaches a peak where it can't go any further, because when it goes farther, then it equals to the big O, or orgasm. Then resolution, a lot of people call that as, oh, it's time to cuddle now, but everybody has their different preferences in terms of what to do after orgasm. Some people do like to cuddle, of course. Some people like to roll over and go to sleep. Some people like to go to the kitchen for a snack, right? Now, what Masters and Johnson may have left out, though, is this idea of attraction, because these other 4 things are not likely to happen except in the unfortunate instances of forced encounters. That's not likely to happen unless there's attraction to begin with. And then Len Miller talks a little bit about faking orgasm, and we find out that both men and women fake orgasms occasionally. We know that women are more relational, more pro-social perhaps than men are. And so what we find is that a smaller percentage of men report that they fake orgasm, and when they do, it's because they are tired of the sexual activity and fake it so they can end it, or they want to end a very uncomfortable situation. Or women, on the other hand, seem to be a little more concerned about their partners, because they usually fake orgasm because they don't want to hurt their partner's feelings. And of course, as far as heterosexual women are concerned, they don't want to damage the male ego. So that's kind of an overview of some of the things he discusses. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, and enjoy your week.